Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. My name is Ricky, and what I'm about to share with you is something I never thought would happen to me. If you had asked me a year ago if I trusted my wife, I would have said yes without hesitation. I loved Julia with everything in me. She wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend, my partner, the person I believed I would spend the rest of my life with. I never had a reason to doubt her. Julia is someone you look at and immediately think, this is a good person. She had this soft, gentle presence, always smiling, always carrying herself with grace. If you saw her, you'd never guess she was capable of hurting someone, let alone betraying the man who gave her his whole heart. And that's what made everything that happened even harder to believe. From the outside, looking in, my marriage was solid. At home, everything was just as it had always been. Julia didn't act differently. She didn't become distant, and she didn't start treating me any less than before. If anything, she still seemed happy. Always making sure the house was in order, checking in on me, and doing all the little things that made me feel loved. I traveled often for work, but even then, nothing fell off. She would call, text, and update me on everything like she always did. There were no sudden mood swings, no unexplained disappearances, no late-night outings that would make me suspicious. If I had to bet money on it, I would have said with full confidence that my wife was faithful. That's why when she told me she was pregnant, something inside me felt off. It was late in the evening, and I had just gotten home from a long day at work. I was tired, mentally drained from managing the expansion of my business, but she was standing there in the kitchen, looking excited, almost glowing. She turned to me with a big smile and said, "Ricky, I have some amazing news. I'm pregnant." I paused for a second, then smiled and pulled her into a hug. I told her congratulations, that I was happy for us. But I felt a wave of doubt creeping in. I had spent the last couple of months traveling back and forth, barely home long enough to have a proper meal, let alone be intimate with my wife. The timeline wasn't making sense in my head. I didn't say anything, though. What was I supposed to say? "That's great, Julia. But how exactly did this happen when I've barely been around?" No. That would have started a fight. And if, by some tiny chance, the baby was mine? I didn't want to plant seeds of doubt in my marriage for no reason. So I swallowed my skepticism, kept my face neutral, and played the role of the supportive husband. Later that night, when I was alone in our bedroom, I started doing the math in my head. Pregnancy is measured in weeks, counting from the first day of the woman's last period. If she had just now realized she was pregnant, that meant she had missed at least one cycle already. But that didn't add up because if I thought back to my schedule, the last time we had been together was well before the window where conception should have happened. Like a week later, I turned to Julia one night and asked, "So how far along do you think you are?" I kept my voice light. She looked up from her phone and shrugged. "I don't know exactly," she said. "Maybe a month, maybe more." That answer didn't sit right with me. A woman who just found out she's pregnant usually has some idea. Most women track their cycles. But she was acting clueless, like she hadn't even thought about it. I just nodded and acted like it wasn't a big deal. So I asked, "When do you think we should set up the first doctor's appointment, and I want us to go for the first scan together. I want to see our baby with you." I smiled when I said it, playing the part of the excited father-to-be. She seemed surprised at first, but then she smiled back. "Really? That's sweet," she said. I could tell she wasn't expecting me to take such an interest. That worked in my favor. I didn't want to give her any room to manipulate the situation. If she had time alone with a doctor, she could try to play around with dates, make it all seem reasonable. But if I was right there, hearing everything firsthand, she wouldn't have that chance. A few days later, we were at the clinic. I sat beside her, watching as the technician moved the scanner over her stomach. I kept my face calm. Then the screen lit up and the technician spoke. "Looks like you're about 8 weeks long," she said. 8 weeks. I barely reacted. I just nodded and smiled like any excited husband would. But inside, everything clicked into place. I hadn't touched Julia in that time frame. There was no way this baby was mine. I stole a glance at Julia. She was smiling at the screen, completely unaware of what was going through my mind. That moment should have been one of the happiest of my life if that was my child, but all I felt was cold. While she was busy believing her secret was safe, I was already planning for what would happen when the truth finally came out. I threw myself into work to stay busy. For weeks, I wrestled with the same question. Can this marriage survive if the baby isn't mine? I wonder if I could move past it. Or I could forgive her. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that staying in the marriage would mean one of two things. Either living with a lie or raising another man's child as my own. Neither option sat well with me. The moment that the paternity test confirmed my worst fear, I needed to be ready to walk away. That's when I got in touch with my lawyer. I didn't want to just file for divorce. I wanted to make sure that when I left, I wouldn't be giving up anything I had worked for. There was no way I was going to let betrayal cost me more than it already had. So we got to work. Together we restructured my assets layer by layer until on paper I owned next to nothing. The house? No longer in my name. The cars? Technically belonged to a holding company. My business? Owned by a foreign entity I had set up years ago for tax reasons. If Julia thought she was going to walk away with half of everything, she was in for a rude awakening. My lawyer made sure everything was airtight, impossible to contest. If things went south, Julia would leave with what she brought into the marriage. Nothing more. And so I waited. I worked. I planned. And I watched as the months passed, knowing that when the moment of truth finally came, I wouldn't be the one left picking up the pieces. The months passed by quickly. And before I knew it, Julia was in labor. I was out of town on business when I got the message. Most men in my position would have been filled with excitement, rushing back to meet their newborn child. But for me, excitement had nothing to do with it. I booked the next available flight for one reason only. I needed to be there to make sure a DNA test was done before any emotions or legal documents tied me to a child that was a mine. By the time I landed and got to the hospital, Julia had already given birth. She was lying in bed, exhausted, but smiling when she saw me walk in. The nurses and doctors greeted me warmly, assuming I was just another happy father meeting his son for the first time. I played my part well. I walked over, kissed Julia on the forehead, and looked at the baby in her arms. He was small, wrinkled, and had that newborn fragility. I didn't feel anything. Julia probably thought my silence was because I was overwhelmed with emotion. The house? No longer in my name. The cars? Technically belonged to a holding company. My business? Owned by a foreign entity I had set up years ago for tax reasons. If Julia thought she was going to walk away with half of everything, she was in for a rude awakening. My lawyer made sure everything was airtight, impossible to contest. If things went south, Julia would leave with what she brought into the marriage. Nothing more. And so I waited. I worked. I planned. And I watched as the months passed, knowing that when the moment of truth finally came, I wouldn't be the one left picking up the pieces. The months passed by quickly. And before I knew it, Julia was in labor. I was out of town on business when I got the message. Most men in my position would have been filled with excitement, rushing back to meet their newborn child. But for me, excitement had nothing to do with it. I booked the next available flight for one reason only. I needed to be there to make sure a DNA test was done before any emotions or legal documents tied me to a child that was a mine. By the time I landed and got to the hospital, Julia had already given birth. She was lying in bed, exhausted, but smiling when she saw me walk in. The nurses and doctors greeted me warmly, assuming I was just another happy father meeting his son for the first time. I played my part well. I walked over, kissed Julia on the forehead, and looked at the baby in her arms. He was small, wrinkled, and had that newborn fragility. I didn't feel anything. Julia probably thought my silence was because I was overwhelmed with emotion. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Isn't he beautiful?" I nodded and forced a small smile. I had to be careful. If I showed any suspicion now, it would raise questions. She had no idea what was coming. When the nurse came over with the birth certificate, I took a deep breath. "I'll sign it later," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I just want to take everything in first." No one thought twice about it. New fathers get overwhelmed all the time. But in reality, I had no intention of signing anything until the DNA test results came back. The hospital had a policy that allowed paternity tests upon request, and I had made arrangements before I even landed. The sample was taken that same day. Benita was too exhausted to notice, and I made sure to act like nothing was out of the ordinary. Hours later, the results came in. I sat in the hospital lounge, envelope in my hands, knowing exactly what it would say before I even opened it. I had spent months preparing for this moment, yet when I unfolded the paper and saw the words probability of paternity, 0% in black and white, it made it real. I took a slow breath, folded the paper neatly, and put in my pocket. When I walked back into the room, Benita was rocking the baby, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. As we drove out of the hospital parking lot, the air inside the car felt heavy. Benita had just given birth and under normal circumstances. This should have been a joyful moment, but I wasn't smiling. I wasn't holding her hand or talking about baby names. My grip on the steering wheel was tight and my mind was clear. I had waited 9 long months for this moment, and now there was nothing left to wait for. I took a different turn, one that didn't lead home. At first, she didn't notice, probably too caught up in the moment, thinking we were heading home as a happy family. But as the road started to look unfamiliar, she turned to me. Her voice laced with confusion. "Where were we going?" she asked, her tone light but cautious. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't answer right away. I wanted the moment to stretch for her to feel the weight of what was coming. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but firm. "Who is the father of the baby?" Silence. For a split second, she just stared at me. Then, her expression changed. "What? Ronald, what are you talking about?" She scoffed, shaking her head. "How can you even ask me that?" She was playing dumb, acting like the idea of me questioning the child's paternity was beyond belief. But I didn't flinch. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the folded DNA test results, and tossed them onto her lap. "Read it," I said. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the words, and I watched as the blood drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She blinked rapidly, her breath quickening. For the first time since this pregnancy started, she had nothing to say. I let the silence hang between us. Let her sit in it. Let her understand that this was real. Then, like a switch flipping, she finally found her voice. "Ronald, please," she whispered. "Let's go home. We need to talk about this." Her voice cracked, and I could hear the desperation creeping in. She wasn't denying it anymore. She wasn't outraged or defensive. She knew she was caught. Now, she just wanted to control the damage. I let out a short laugh. "Home," I repeated, shaking my head. I glanced at her, and for the first time, I let my true emotion show. "Benita, you are going home, but not to our house." Her breath hitched, and she turned to me fully now, panic setting in. "What do you mean?" she asked. Her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I just kept driving. She would figure it out soon enough. I pulled up in front of her parents' house and put the car in park. The engine hummed softly, but inside the car, the silence was heavy. Benita turned to me. Her face still pale from everything that had just happened. She had been quiet for most of the ride, probably hoping I would calm down or that I was taking her home after all. But now, as she looked out the window and realized where we were, panic flickered across her face. "Ronald, why are we here?" Her voice was shaky, almost pleading. I kept my hands on the wheel and exhaled slowly. "Get out," I said. My voice was steady, controlled. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. Her breathing hitched. "No, please. Let's go home and talk about this. Please." I turned to face her, finally meeting her eyes. "You are home. Now get out." The betrayal had already happened. I wasn't here for negotiations. The front door of the house opened, and her parents stepped out, confused. Her mother frowned and stepped forward. "Benita, what's going on?" Benita turned to me again, pleading with her eyes. But I just leaned back in my seat and gestured toward her parents. "Go ahead," I said, my voice calm. "Tell them who the father of the baby is." The color drained from her face, and her lips trembled. "Ronald, please. Tell them." My voice was sharp this time. She broke. Tears spilled down her face as she clutched the baby. Her mother hurried down the steps, wrapping an arm around her. "What's happening?" she asked again, looking between us. I didn't answer. This wasn't my mess to explain. Her father, still standing on a porch, took a slow step forward. His face was tense, reading the situation, piecing things together. His eyes landed on me, as if silently asking for confirmation. I said nothing. I didn't have to. Her mother gently took the baby from her arms, her maternal instincts overriding her confusion. "Come inside," she whispered, but Benita stood frozen, sobbing. I didn't wait. The second the baby was out of her arms, and Benita got out of the car, I jumped back inside the car, reached for the gear shift. I had nothing more to say. No parting words. I pulled the door shut, reversed out of the driveway, and without another glance, I drove off, leaving them standing there, confused, devastated, and drowning in the consequences of her choices. That night, I sat alone in my home, and sent a go-ahead message to my lawyer. Proceed with the divorce, citing infidelity as the reason. DNA proof attached. I had spent months preparing for this possibility, and now that it was here, I felt nothing. The next morning, I got up early and made arrangements to have all the locks changed. I wasn't going to give her the chance to step foot into my house again, not after what she had done. By the time the locksmith arrived, I had already packed up the last few reminders of her presence, her clothes, her personal items, anything that she had left behind before going into labor. I didn't bother throwing them out, or sending them to her parents. As far as I was concerned, they weren't my problem anymore. When Benita arrived later that day, she walked up to the front door, only to find that her key no longer worked. I watched from inside as she tried again, and again, jiggling the lock, looking confused at first, then frustrated. Then she rang the doorbell. I didn't answer. She stepped back and took out her phone, and a moment later, mine began buzzing. The moment I saw her name, I blocked the number. Not even 5 minutes later, another unknown number popped up on my screen. I picked up, and the second I heard her voice, I blocked that one too. Tired of waiting, she left. But she wasn't done. She kept trying, switching numbers, sending texts, leaving voicemails, some angry, some desperate. None of them mattered. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. She made her choice when she slept with another man and tried to pass his child off as mine. She had no place in my life anymore. It wasn't long before her parents started calling me as well. First, it was her mother speaking in that soft, pleading voice of hers, saying we needed to talk things through like adults. Then her father, a little more stern, telling me to at least be reasonable. Reasonable? Was it reasonable for their daughter to betray her husband and expect him to just accept it? I blocked them both without hesitation. Whatever family I had once built with Benita was gone, and I was going to make damn sure she understood that. When the divorce papers were delivered to Benita at her parents' house, I didn't expect the level of desperation she showed. She fought back with everything she had. She hired a lawyer, contested the divorce, and tried to paint herself as the victim. In her version of events, I was the husband who abandoned her when she needed me most, the man who turned his back on his own child. She clung to that lie, as if saying it enough times would somehow make it true. But I had something stronger than words. I had proof. The court ordered another DNA test, and just like before, the results came back the same. That child wasn't mine. The moment those papers were presented in court, the air seemed to shift. I saw it in the judge's face, in the way Benita's lawyer suddenly lost all momentum. There was nothing left to argue. The facts were right there, in black and white. She had cheated. She had gotten pregnant, and she had tried to pass off another man's child's mind. No amount of crying or desperate pleas could change that. When the ruling finally came, it was exactly what I expected. The judge granted the divorce. Normally, I would have been required to settle her financially, provide spousal support, split assets, maybe even pay her legal fees. But thanks to the work I had done beforehand, there was nothing to split. Legally, I didn't own anything significant. My businesses, my properties, my accounts, they were all locked down under legal structures that kept them far out of reach. Benita walked into that courtroom, thinking she could at least walk away with something. She left with nothing. As I stepped out into the courthouse parking lot, I saw her standing with her parents. She was crying. Her mother held her close, whispering something to her, while her father just stood there, silent, staring at the ground. They looked broken. All of them. I never thought I would find myself in that situation. I never thought the woman I married, the woman I trusted, would betray me like that. And I certainly never thought I'd be capable of walking away without a shred of sympathy for her. But that's the thing about betrayal. It changes you. It hardens you in ways you never saw coming. I gave her my love, my trust, my loyalty. She gave me lies, deceit, and a child that wasn't mine. Now, she was just another person from my past. And as I walked to my car and drove away, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't looking back. You know, looking back at everything, I can say I learned some hard but important lessons from this whole mess. And I think it's only fair to share them with you because, honestly, no one expects to be in a situation like this until it happens. First, blind trust is dangerous. I don't care how innocent someone looks or how much you love them. Never assume they are incapable of betraying you. I trusted Benita with everything. I never thought twice about what she was doing when I wasn't around. And that's how I got blindsided. She didn't start acting different. She didn't change how she treated me. If I had gone only by behavior, I would have never suspected a thing. But reality doesn't care about your feelings. The truth is, people are capable of things you'd never imagine. So, always stay aware. Trust but verify. Second, financial security is everything. When emotions are high, you can't afford to be reckless. If I hadn't protected my assets before confronting her, I could have lost everything in that divorce. The law doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about what's legally yours. And, in many cases, even if your spouse cheats, you could still end up paying them if you're not careful. That's why I made sure that, on paper, I own nothing. The houses, the cars, the business, all of it was legally out of reach. When the time came, she walked away with nothing. And I didn't have to fight for what was mine. If you take one thing from my experience, let it be this. Always structure your finances in a way that protects you from the worst-case scenario. Because you never know when you'll need it. Third, emotional control wins battles. If I had acted out of anger the moment I suspected her, I would have lost. If I had confronted her too soon, she would have lied, manipulated, and played the victim. And if I had reacted impulsively, I could have made decisions that worked against me later. Instead, I stayed calm. I planned. I waited. I let the truth reveal itself. And by the time I acted, I had all the proof I needed. People will try to gaslight you when they're caught. They'll make you doubt what you know. But when you have patience and control over your emotions, you put yourself in a position of power. And finally, some betrayals are unforgivable. I don't see love the same way anymore. I used to believe that if two people loved each other, that was enough. Now I know better. Love isn't just about how you feel. It's about what someone does when they think they won't get caught. Benita didn't just cheat. She got pregnant. She carried another man's child and tried to make me the father. That isn't just betrayal. That's deception on a whole different level. And once someone shows you who they really are, you don't make excuses for them. You walk away. That's my story. But now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have forgiven her? Would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments. And trust me, you don't want to miss them.